welcome to today's Chamber's CEO Leadership Series, sponsored by Southwest Airlines. I'm Sherry Menor McNamara with the Chamber of Commerce, and we're pleased that you could join us this morning of why it's essential to work on yourself as CEO and how to do it, presented by organizational psychologist Dr. Kim Payton. But before we begin the program, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. First, if anyone has questions during the event, please feel free to submit them by clicking on the Q&A button on the bottom of your toolbar. And secondly, the webinar is being recorded and the video link will be emailed to the attendees 1 to 2 business days after the session. Now, these series would not be possible without our Investor Circle member who has done so much for our community since coming to Hawaii. And so at this time, I'd like to introduce Kelly Knox, a good friend as well of Southwest Airlines, to provide a few remarks. Kelly?
Aloha and mahalo so much for being here today. Like Sherry mentioned, my name's Kelly Knox, and I work on the community outreach team at Southwest Airlines. And I have the pleasure of ensuring that Southwest is seen more as a neighbor and not just an airline, and really being ingrained in the local community. At Southwest, our purpose is connecting people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. And I'm proud to say we just celebrated our 2nd year of service to the Hawaiian Islands, which has also coincidentally meant our 2nd year of membership with the Chamber. So mahalo, Sherry, to you and your team for welcoming us to the community and ensuring that we've had a successful first couple of years. It's definitely been an honor to be here with you today, and thank you for your support of the Chamber as they advocate for our business community as a whole. I think we knew long before last year that the Chamber is so critical for all of us, but really enhanced the meaning of that in the last year as they played a critical role in ensuring the success of the business community and that we have a thriving economy. I know many of your businesses and industries have struggled and are still struggling to mitigate the challenges of the pandemic, and here at Southwest it's no different. But hopefully there's a sense of optimism for all of you as there is for us as we're starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Bookings are starting to trend in the right direction. People are getting vaccinated, and I think they're becoming more comfortable with traveling. We started our Southwest Promise about a year ago, which is our enhanced cleaning protocols and operational procedures to ensure the health and well-being of all of our passengers are top of mind. We've worked with medical experts from Harvard, Stanford, UT Southwestern, and across the CDC to ensure that policies are rooted in science, and we've continued to adapt this Southwest Promise as we learn more. And to make it more personal to you, in Hawaii, we've been working with state and local stakeholders to ensure that our passengers are equipped with the latest information and are aware of how to be good guests of the islands. Exciting news for us, last week we announced that we are part of the pre-clear program as part of the Safe Travels initiative by the state, which makes expediting processing for passengers with their arrival into Hawaii that much better. So that's great not only for guests, but also for residents who are traveling about. So all of that to say, we remain committed to Hawaii, not just to promote the tourism industry, but to provide travel options for the local community. We know as a business community that you have travel needs, and we've spent the last couple of years adapting our Southwest business travel opportunities, enhancing our global distribution booking platforms, and making it as easy as possible for you to join our program. And I'm happy to connect you with one of our corporate travel managers if that's of interest to you. But it's not that just business travel needs that you have. We know you have Ohana to visit and well-deserved vacations to take, and we're honored to be an option for you. In terms of service for those vacations or business travel, we have 5 mainland destinations, which connects you to our network of over 120 other destinations. Long Beach is our newest California gateway, and we currently have more flights in and out of Hawaii than we have ever since we started in the last 2 months. So that's an incredible statement for us, and again, I hope it reiterates our commitment to you and that to the local community. So I'm excited to be here with all of you today, excited to hear Dr. Payton's message. I hope you find this session informative, beneficial, and walk away with some practical takeaways to benefit you, your mental health, and your organizations as a whole. Mahalo to Sherry and the entire Chamber team, and with that, I'll pass it back over to you guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks so much for that message of staying committed in Hawaii, especially during this challenging time. So I really appreciate that and look forward to continuing to partner with Southwest on a number of initiatives to get our economy back on track. Okay, now I'd like to introduce our featured speaker for today's CEO Leadership Series event. Dr. Kim Payton is board certified as a consulting organizational psychologist by the American Board of Professional Psychologists and licensed in the state of Hawaii. For 40 years, Dr. Payton has studied the field of transpersonal psychology, which is the study of the cultivation of human potential. He has applied the insights and methods of human development and transformation to his work as an organizational psychologist. Dr. Kim brings a trained and objective partnership to understanding human dynamics, developing organizational change strategies, assessing leadership competencies, and counseling individuals and groups through challenges. So we're so excited to welcome Dr. Payton to our virtual stage. Doctor?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. It's these two streams of study that I followed that Sherry just described. One is, you could say it's the outer work. It's work as a consulting organizational psychologist. I've dealt over the years mostly with organizations that have to go through changes for one reason or another, and working with leadership teams in the context of that change. The other field of study is more inward. It's the study of transpersonal psychology, how we evolve as human beings. So it's really all about evolution. Outer evolution, organizationally, inner evolution as a person. In particular, today we're talking about this CEO role, although it could really be about any senior leadership C-suite kind of a role. One of the things that you're probably familiar with is this idea that what got you there isn't necessarily going to make you successful. As a matter of fact, a lot of times the dynamics and strengths and skills that got you into a position, a new position, promotion, let's say, may be the very things that will make you fail. So when people get into a new position, or the circumstances change a lot, the demands change a lot, it takes a while to realize, where you are and what's impacting you, and how do you adapt to that new set of circumstances. This is particularly true of the CEO role, which is really unlike any other role. It's always a surprise to people. And I think the place to start really is to be aware that that role has very unique powers and dangers. For instance, in the role of the CEO, the buck lands on your desk and it isn't going to go anyplace else. You can ask for help, but it belongs to you. People are very dependent on you for their sense of security, their sense of identity, their sense of well-being, and they pick that up off of you directly, off of your behavior. That doesn't really much matter what you say if you're communicating a very different message with other parts of your personality, your body language or whatever. So there's tremendous pressure there, and there's powers there too. You get information other people don't get, and you have to figure out what to do with it. You have expectations on you by people who can hire you and fire you to get certain outcomes, which may or may not be viable or even a good idea. And worst of all, you have the power to get away with things. You have the power to do it because you want to do it, or not do it because you don't want to do it. So there's tremendous pressure on this role psychologically, and it tends to make or break people in various ways. So I wanted to show you a slide. Let's share the screen here. Let's see if I can do this. This is, can you see that okay? These are derailers. This comes from a book called Why CEOs Fail. I'd like you to look at this list of derailers: arrogance, melodrama, volatility, excessive caution, habitual distrust. Lovely list, isn't it? See if you can find yourself on this list. Are there one or two or more of these that you struggled with over time? I think we could probably all find some of these that are old favorites of ours that we've had to work on. So these manifestations come from dysfunctional personality dynamics. They come from parts of our personality that we overuse or that we underuse. They come from character defects. You know, there's all sorts of things that can play out here that can cause a CEO or any person to fail. So working on yourself is particularly important in order to overcome these tendencies, which they actually get amplified in the organization. We create organizations in order to amplify human qualities. We want to get more with less. And so we create organizations to do that. But what some people don't realize is that organizations amplify negative human qualities as effectively as positive human qualities. And in a lot of cases, organizations amplify negative qualities more than positive qualities. For some reason, we'll pass a negative perception, a negative gossip on more quickly than a positive acknowledgement, something strange about us as human beings. So this is one reason to work on ourselves, is to prevent ourselves from destroying ourselves. Most of the CEOs that I've seen that have failed didn't get taken out by somebody else. They got taken out by themselves, by aspects of themselves that they hadn't come to grips with. But then there's also these emerging expectations. This comes from, there's a couple of articles from McKinsey that came out this year, looking at the pressures on CEOs in this time of COVID and other things. Other articles were talking about the increased rate of CEO turnover these days because people just can't handle the pressure, or they don't know what to do, or they decide it's time to go away. So you look at this list of expectations, aspire 10 times faster. Terrific. And this elevate to be at the same level as to do. The self-care business is really important because people are on edge. There's a tremendous increase in the use of antidepressants, and stress is a huge problem with people. And they take their cue as to whether things are okay from the leadership team, especially from the CEO. If the CEO's okay, we're okay. But if you don't bring a calm presence to a stable presence to the organization, then you become a big part of the problem. And this embracing stakeholder capitalism, well, that's an easy line to say, but that really means redesigning the enterprise. That's bringing a whole set of other factors that we have to take into account these days: the impact on the environment, the impact on society. These are all factors that, in the past world have just been kind of externalized in a lot of cases, which simplifies the business proposition. Well, it's not simple anymore. Here's another article from McKinsey on the same subject. They're pointing out the importance of corporate strategy, and that's one that lands on the CEO's desk to figure out what is our strategy, how are we going to deal with these circumstances, and then there's a matter of getting the board to support properly. So there are these tremendous pressures on a CEO and tremendous increased expectations, and it's not going to end any day soon. It just seems to be accelerating as we go along. So it kind of brings up this challenge. If we're not careful, both the organization and change tend to bring out the worst in us instead of the best. This is something that happens as a function of stress. We get tired out, and all of a sudden we find ourselves doing or saying things that we later on wish had not happened. As I was thinking about this presentation, I was reminded of how diamonds can be made. If you want to make a diamond, you take some raw material, you take some carbon, which is what we're made out of, and you subject it to tremendous pressure and heat. And if you do that properly over the right amount of time, you get a crystallization, a beautiful crystallization, a beautiful shining thing that, if it's cut properly, is extremely valuable and beautiful. But if you don't do every step right, you can actually waste the carbon. You can waste the energy. And this is really a lot what the CEO role is like. It's a set of pressures that either bring out the very highest in a human being or bring out the worst. And to me, that's really the essence of the subject here. So how do you work on this? Where I like to start and this is getting into the transpersonal dimension, the inner dimension of the work. You're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got this little guy at the top here that has evolved through these different levels. And to me, the really interesting thing is this list of qualities that Abraham Maslow identified as being characterizers of self-actualizers. Superior perception of reality, increased acceptance of self and others and nature, increased problem centering, autonomy, improved interpersonal relations, more democratic character structure, increased creativity, a tendency to manifest superior development of basic talents, less dependent on external circumstances, more internally directed, less dependent on others. So this is, I think this is the kind of people we want in our organizations. They don't have to be managed. They're self-motivated, they're creative, they're resilient, and certainly this is something that we'd like to see in our leadership, especially the CEO. So this is really where the field of transpersonal psychology begins, is this idea that we are capable of a lot more. And a lot of the unfortunate dynamics that we see play out in the world are really pathology. So what we really need to do is to come to an understanding of, how do we work with this? What does self-actualization really mean? Maybe the most interesting question there is, what is a self that actualizes? So there is this idea of self-structures. Self-structures arise out of a deep urge in us, in human beings, to know who we are, what we are, where we come from, where are we going. There's something in us that wants to know that, and it does a whole lot of different things to figure that out over our lifetime. The self, what is structured, is this vast network of integrated patterns of perception, of interpretation, of reaction, of cognition, emotion, identification. We have all these psychological functions, all of which are conditioned through our life. And there's this whatever this is in us that wants to know who we are, operates through this pattern of these conditions patterns. And we come to see ourselves this way. These patterns evolve naturally, these self-structures. You might think of what you really wanted when you were 13 years old. What did you believe you were? What did you want? What did you wish for? Think about how your life would be if you had gotten what you asked for, if that was the structure that guided your life now. Well, for some people, that is actually how we are. But I think you can see that you've probably evolved through various self-structures. You thought you were one thing or wanted something, and then that life's challenges challenged that structure, and then something fuller emerged, hopefully. Something more adaptive, something richer evolved out of those self-structures. And it is possible to get stuck at a certain stage of self-structure development. You've probably known people who, you look at their behavior and you say, geez, they're kind of behaving like a 5-year-old. Or, this is like high school dynamics playing out here in your organization. And sure enough, it's like people didn't evolve past that high school kind of, gossipy, oversensitive, sort of a manifestation. So this is what I mean by self-structures. It's these patterns of perception, patterns of identification, patterns of behavior, which, the beautiful thing about transpersonal psychology is it's a study of how these structures evolve and how we can participate in our own evolution. So perhaps one of the greatest transpersonal psychologists that ever lived was a man named John Bennett. He was a British scientist. He worked before the term transpersonal psychology really even existed. And perhaps I should back up a little bit. Give a couple examples of self-structures. Perhaps the most familiar one to you would be Freud, id, ego, superego. This is a way of conceptualizing these intrapersonal dynamics. And we have this sense that you know, the id has this quality, and the ego has this quality, and the superego has that quality. Kind of like there's a lower self that has to do with our animal nature. There's a middle self that is related to the ego mind, and then there's this higher self, a sense of something higher in us that has to do with ethics, morality, conscience, higher human abilities, that sort of thing. Interestingly, there is an example of this system in the Hawaiian system, the Hawaiian Huna system. Lower self is called unihipili. And it's this sort of playful self that's responsible for our memory, and our mana is in this lower self. And then there's a middle self. Uhane means a thin straw, and it relates to this middle self that's always talking in our head all day long. You know, it's got a lot of opinions, and it's got a lot of preferences, and it's constantly yakking in your head, and it's able to make some choices, navigate a bit. And then there's the aumakua, the higher self, which is the level at which we're all one, in a sense, and it's the level out of which higher human capabilities emerge. So if you look at various wisdom traditions and various modern transpersonal psychologies, you see a lot of different models of these three levels of self and how they play out. So John Bennett studied these systems, and he came up with this formulation that there is a true self, divided self, a reactional self, and a material self. And I wanted to share this with you today because if you're going on a journey, it's a good idea to have a map. And this is a map of this journey of the evolution of different levels of self. So where we can begin is with the material self. This is the first self to emerge in the young child. It is a self that emerges out of the physical experience, out of the body's physical experience. This self is responsible for survival and for navigating the world of objects. So if you don't have a well-formed material self, you have trouble dealing with them. And you probably know people like this that have difficulty with the material world. They trip over things. They can't quite get their physical act together. So it's kind of a problem. The material self, though, has its own limitations, and that is that it sees the world as objects, which means it has no empathy, which means it is capable of tremendous cruelty. And you can see this with young children. They can be incredibly cruel. And you may know some people who didn't grow up out of this, who can be terribly cruel, you know, who are capable of doing whatever it takes to get what they want, irrespective of who it harms. It's very logical, analytical, atomistic. You know, it sees everything in compartments. It doesn't have a sense of wholes, and it also doesn't have a sense of meaning. It adorns itself with success and possessions. It believes the material world is the only reality, and it applies material assumptions to everything. Is it possible to become a CEO being dominated by the material self? Absolutely, no question about it. It may even be easier to be a CEO in some circumstances because it's possible to be absolutely ruthless. And I think we've probably seen some examples of that. And it's a scary thing that this is one of the dynamics that takes place in the corporate world. Fortunately, there's another level of self called the, oops, I went the wrong direction there, called the reactional self. We may know this self better by the name of ego mind. This is the middle self. This is the one that's talking in your head all the time. It has some restraint. It knows the difference between right and wrong. It listens to this little voice that says, you know, if I do this thing, I'm going to get in trouble. So you can see this evolve in children as they begin to get this sense of right and wrong and consequences, and they learn to become socialized. It's a very important level of self to be part of a productive part of society. And many of our organizational structures are designed to engage, strengthen, cultivate the reactional self so that it can keep the lower self under control so we don't have a totally dysfunctional organization. Dysfunctional organization that's got a whole lot of material self running rampant is going to be in trouble really quick. So this reactional self is really key to that. It's also called the blaming self, though, and it loves to be right. It believes that there is a right and a wrong, and it's black and it's white, and this reactional self has a tremendous need to be right. Beyond everything else, it needs to be right. So when we are in a conflict with another person, when we don't like something that's going on, and we make up our story about what it is we don't like, or what we prefer, or what we want somebody to do, when we're in conflict, it is the ego mind, the reactional self, that writes this story for us about how we're right and they're wrong. And so if you look at conflict resolution between two people, let's say, you can see them working through their ego dynamics of having to realize that not everything they were telling themselves about the situation is really accurate. They altered their story. They left out certain facts. They modified certain things so they can be right. And in order to resolve that conflict, they have to give up some of those preferences and admit to where they're part of the problem. So you can see a lot of the organizational dynamics we deal with have to do with the interplay between people's lower self and middle self. Those things play out, and it can be endless. There is another level of the game, however. And this other level of the game is called the divided self. And this is something I'd like you to think about. One of the things that Maslow described in his work was a thing called peak experience. These are times in your life where you see the world and yourself more deeply. Somehow there's an awakening, and you have a profound experience of life and what your life means and what it's about and how it all works. Some of us recognize these peak experiences as very important guiding lights to follow. This divided self receives flashes of inspiration. It's the moments when you suddenly understand something more deeply. It's the level where your conscience speaks to you, and you have this deeper sense of what you have to do, whether you want to do it or not. You have to do it, or you mustn't do it, even though you do want to do it. The divided self is capable of real understanding beyond my own ego perception, meaning, I've gone through conflict resolution, let's say, and I've come to understand the point of view of the other person. And my worldview is now enriched by understanding how they see the world. One of the main things that evolves through this self-structure evolution is the ability to see things from another person's point of view. I think we make the assumption that we see things from other people's point of view, but we really don't, unless we go through this work of deepening our awareness, of challenging our ego structures, and this happens through crisis. We have problems with certain people, and those problems, if we work through them properly, challenge our self-structures and open us up, deepen our understanding, broaden our world, free us up of our own conditioned limitations. So, it's important to realize that difficulty, painful experience is absolutely critical to the evolution of human beings. So this, taking up a senior leadership role is really kind of presents you with a choice, I think. I think the choice is you could use the power of the senior CEO role, especially, to get away with things, to have it your way, to insist on your perception. Or you can engage other people and really try to understand them and become changed yourself to the point where you begin to have much broader, much more functional, much more all-embracing, profound understandings of the world. So this divided self is torn. This is not an easy place to be. This divided self is torn between this higher inspiration, this intuitive understanding of the world, this being much more driven by conscience. It's drawn between that and the desires of the lower self, the middle self. So there's an internal struggle that's part of this evolution, and it's not an easy place to be. There's a lot of stress in that. And it's a place that, because of that, people tend to choose not to be there. So they go unconscious of this struggle. They medicate themselves with alcohol, drugs, workaholism, sex, distractions of various kinds. But in this work, what we try to do is to find ways that people can engage in this struggle, this inner struggle, and this outer struggle, engage the struggles that are brought to them in their role in the organization as a way to bring this deeper, more functional kind of self to the fore. Which brings us to the let's see where we're at here. True self. This is the top of the pyramid, let's say. It's the little guy on the top of the self-actualization pyramid. We're not going to talk much about this because it really ventures into the world of theology and philosophy. But what people say about this level of self is it's peaceful. It's a place of contentment and peacefulness. And I hope that's something you've experienced, but that's a natural state for human beings. And this higher level of our being is the source of our genuinely human qualities. Sincerity, serenity, forbearance, gratitude, contentment, fortitude. And a really interesting thing for CEOs, Mr. Bennett, in describing this level of self, said that a person at this level of self is capable of discerning the pattern of what is unfolding, meaning, what's happening in your world. Is there a pattern of what's unfolding? The person at this level is capable of seeing that pattern and of making decisions based on the seeing of that pattern. And he made the point that he believed that it was this ability that made Napoleon, for example, successful. And he had this ability to perceive the pattern of what was unfolding in his world, and he could craft his strategy, position himself and his armies in relation to the pattern that he saw evolving. That this is a natural capacity for human beings. Mr. Bennett also said that Napoleon lost this ability when he began to believe that he was doing it himself. And take a look at this. It's an interesting differentiation here. There's a difference between the perceiving a pattern of what's unfolding and positioning yourself in relation to it. That's very different from believing that you're the one creating the patterns. You can see the ego sneak in there. And this is one of the things that's very common in this work, is to see that our ego wants to steal credit. It wants to grab attention. It wants to be right, not be wrong. It wants to be the one that achieved the goal. And it corrupts. It corrupts this ability. The ability itself collapses when the ego takes over. And you lose connection with that deep seeing, which could be so essential to success in the CEO role. So how do you work on this? There's a lot of different ways to work on this. We hear a lot about mindfulness these days and presence. This is really the work that we're talking about. How do you be mindful and present? How do you cultivate that? In my understanding, it begins with making a decision that working on yourself is a high priority. CEOs, senior leaders are very busy people. There isn't a lot of time to do things, but this takes some time. It needs a place in your life. And it begins with a sober self-assessment. It's like in AA, it begins with a sober self-assessment. And it continues with self-observation. And there's a trick in that. When you observe yourself, you get to see if you can begin to disassociate from your own lower self and middle self behavior. You can learn about what's not working and perhaps get some ideas of how to change it. But the really interesting thing about self-observation is you're actually cultivating this higher level of self, because it is that higher level of self that is capable of observing the lower and middle self. So you're actually feeding it attention. You're feeding it valuation. So that part of your being that's observing it begins to grow because you pay attention to it. And then there's a few outer things that you can do. You can recruit managers on your group, your management group. You can recruit people who are better at what they do than you are at that thing. You know, you surround yourself with people who are better at what they do than you are at those things. And you listen to them. You defer to them when it's in the best interest of the organization. You know, this is a good idea organizationally, but it also helps you work on your ego, because you got to give up something in order for that to happen. You can make your senior management team into a real team. A lot of people call their group a team, but if you look at it carefully, you may often see it's not really a team. They're not really interdependent to a common purpose. They leave the overall organizational responsibility to the CEO, and they are responsible for their silos. Making them into a real team means sharing your responsibility for the entire organization with them and sharing some of your authority with them. So you begin to have a much richer team dynamic, and you begin to engage the higher qualities of everyone on the team, and you start getting better decisions. It's more difficult in the beginning because there's more conflict. We know in team building there's forming, storming, norming. Well, this is where the storming comes in. It's establishing the ability to work through these ego dynamics. And then the last thing I want to suggest is to empower somebody that you trust, preferably more than one somebody that you trust, to tell you what you need to hear, even if you don't want to hear it. This is where spouses come in. This is where trusted secretaries come in, business partners, human resources people, anybody that you trust. You know, you empower them to tell you what you don't want to hear, and you never ever never ever to kill the messenger. So this sort of there's a safety that evolves around giving feedback that you need to hear in order to continue evolving and not getting stuck in an ego structure that can be really deadly for your own development and for the good of the organization. So that's what I wanted to say to you today. I'm interested to hear what your questions might be, so I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Dr. Payton. I'm sure many of us could identify with many of the slides that you talked about. I am going to go straight into the questions. We have one question so far. Actually, this is a good one. On your derailer slide, I saw some of my younger self there. However, I know I struggle to help peers who are arrogant, volatile, or aloof to see that there is a better way that we can work together. Any insights on how to help others come along this journey?
Oh yeah, the most potent medicine that I know is the 360 feedback survey. You know, it's unfortunately it's a tool that has been misused so much that a lot of organizations can't use it because they blew it. They didn't use it right. It has to be used very carefully and supportively. But you know, there's nothing like getting the trouble in Hawaii, especially, is we're not honest with each other. You know, this is like the passive-aggressive capital of the universe. You know, you'll tell everybody else about somebody's problems, but not them directly. You know, so this is the dynamic we need to change. We need to two things. One of them, get rid of gossip. Make an agreement with people to stop talking to other people and instead talk to the person that you know they have a problem with. And you can use tools like 360. There's lots of different versions of it, but people need to hear how they're actually perceived. Oftentimes they've not heard these things before. And the sad thing is, the more arrogant the person is, the more obnoxiously arrogant the person is, the less likely they are to get feedback, because people don't want to go through the difficulty. They don't believe it's going to make any difference. So I think if you can create a culture in your organization where people can engage in these crucial conversations, I strongly suggest you get a book called Crucial Conversations: Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High, and study it as an organization and practice it, because that's where the key, that if people are honest with each other in a constructive way, they get the information they need to get over being angry, aloof, whatever the problem is. That's how we can help each other.
Great advice. The next question I have for you is, I know you worked with many companies here in Hawaii, whether it's the big businesses down to small businesses. Are there different approaches to this type of business? And also, based on working with these businesses, what kind of positive changes do you see when they did implement some of your work with them?
Well, I think there's an optimal size. My perception is as an organization grows, the likelihood of dysfunction grows along with it, because there's a kind of anonymity. It's like crime rates go up as cities grow. They get larger, there's more anonymity, people get away with things, they lose track of the meaning. People, we're very tribal creatures. We do, it's like, for instance, people in the military are oftentimes not fighting to save their country, they're fighting to save their buddies, because that's what they identify with. So the way I see works is you work with units that people who know people. That's the organization that's meaningful to human beings, not a huge organization that they can't really relate to. If you can build an oasis in an organization made of the team that people work with and the people that they serve, that's the place to start. People who have faces, people who have names, people who can see each other and talk to each other. That's where you do the work. You don't try to, these big programs that you roll out with lots of fancy posters and rah-rah. My experience is that doesn't do much. It creates background music at best. What really works is working with people who know each other and who depend on each other for certain outcomes. And of course, there's the family business, which is the most difficult of all, because you're mixing the irrational factors of family with the hopefully objective factors of business, and they don't mix very well. So that adds another whole dimension of how do you separate out familial dynamics from business dynamics. I don't know if this addresses your question, but there's a great book called The Art of Leadership, I think, by Max Dupree. He brings up the word intimacy in that book over and over again. I've never seen that word in a leadership book before or after. But his view was a CEO, to be successful, has to be intimate with the business and the people. And that doesn't mean inappropriately intimate. It means you know them. You know what they do. You know what the business is doing. You're there. You're on it. I think this is a part of the solution: is to structure your relationships so that you're working with the people that are key to your role, and you create a certain intimacy there that allows you to be honest. And then you grow together. You start to grow together and depend on each other, and you begin to be free because you have each other's backs.
Here's another question, another good one. People at lower levels of self-actualization often display traditionally desired leadership qualities like confidence, self-assurance, etc. Do you see any evolution in terms of what boards or hiring committees are looking for, or are we still too easily enamored by these kinds of leaders?
Oh God, that is a really good and I think spooky question. I've been really disappointed in many of the boards that I've worked with. In many cases, I come away seeing that they really aren't doing their job, especially when they've got a dysfunctional CEO. They're not doing their job. They don't call them on it. Oftentimes because that CEO is getting them what they want, irrespective of the cost. So it's a really difficult question. Maybe the board just wants to be lazy and not experience difficulty, or maybe they're getting a big payoff. So these dysfunctional behaviors in leadership exist for a reason. The people are getting something for it. But what I see happening with COVID-19 and change in the climate and all these other things we're dealing with, social unrest, people are realizing that we can no longer continue with leaders who can't balance the needs of these different stakeholders. And a lack of empathy has a huge business cost, societal cost, it could conceivably terminate our existence as a race. I think people are beginning to get that this is serious. You can't afford to have somebody that's just good at taking other people's stuff. That's kind of what's the sort of leaders that a lot of times people look for. Who's best at taking other people's stuff? We want market share. Well, where do you get it? You take it from somebody else. So I think it's a serious question. And I do see some boards beginning to realize that.
What about the hiring aspect, ensuring we bring on the right people? What are some of how can we tell that this is the right person is going to be joining the team?
The one assignment that I cringe at maybe the most is when people ask me to evaluate applicants for their executive positions, because it's so incredibly likely to be wrong. You might as well flip a coin, I think, in a lot of cases. But I really like group hiring situations where you have, people in the organization who are embodiments of the organization's culture, interview the person, and you take the group perception into account. Because if you have a few people who really understand the culture and who you believe are the kind of people you want, they can smell people, they can sense people who are like them or not like them. I think that's probably the best answer that I could give, short answer.
Question, diversity and inclusion has been an important and relevant topic today. And because it promotes more collaboration as well as more perspectives. Going back to the passive aggressive, how can we ensure that we can have productive conversations when we bring different perspectives to the table? Do you have any tools, advice how to manage that or approaches to it?
Well, it goes back to this book, Crucial Conversations. I think that's really the one to study. It basically has three parts to it. Part one is you have to have a common purpose. There's no way you're going to work through conflict, difference of perspective, if you don't have a common purpose. Mom and dad are going to have a hard time resolving their conflicts unless they really care about the kids, or whatever their marriage is about. We need to have a common purpose. And a lot of times people aren't clear about their common purpose. But this is a job for leadership to make what the common purpose is clear. A lot of times people don't understand it because leadership doesn't spend time talking about it. Second thing is you have to make it safe. People have to, these crucial conversations are extremely uncomfortable. They stir up people's psyche and they make them say and do things that they wish they hadn't done. Like, for instance, they're in a heated conversation and the person sighs because they're uptight. And that often looks like an offense. People say, well, what's the matter with you? Would I make you mad? Are you upset with me? Well, no, I just took a breath. Or somebody asks you a question and you roll, you think about it. So, boy, you rolling your eyes at me. You have to be aware that these conversations are hot. This is a heated exchange and it needs to be managed carefully, or people just skitter off into their defenses. And so we have to be perceptive that someone's been offended and we need to be willing to apologize. Say, I didn't mean to offend you. I'm sorry, I was just taking a breath, And the third thing I already mentioned, it's called mastering your stories. Before you get into a situation with somebody where you have to work through a perception, take a look at your story about them or their class of people and ask yourself, did my ego write this story? Did I write this story so that I would be right and they would be wrong? And if so, do I need to edit this story before I bring it out to them? Yeah, it's a good book. It's worth studying.
Well, I definitely put that on my list of books to read. Thank you. We're just about approaching the hour, and just wanted to thank you, Dr. Payton. Your presentation today is so relevant and so critical, and I'm sure this past year, many of us have done some self-reflection as well, and self-assessment. And based on that, some may have made some career changes and just adjusted their leadership style too. But just wanted to thank you again for taking the time to do this for us. And also mahalo to our partner, Southwest Airline, who's an Investor Circle member, for supporting us in putting these C-suite series for us. Stay tuned. We have other speakers in the lineup. But again, to all of you who joined us today, thank you so much for taking the time. And we hope to see you soon again. Mahalo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Payton.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll be sending you, somebody was asking about references. I'll be sending you a list of some suggested books to read.
Oh, wonderful. That'd be great. And then we can send it to the attendees. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.